have mixed feelings in a kind of way. I graduated from Temple, African American Studies, and if you know anything about that space, that was the first, and I went to Temple from New Orleans, right? And so this is a time where I went from calling people black and white to referring to people as Africans and Europeans. Right. So I understand the logic behind, you know, black does not connect to a landmass or to a language and things of that nature. But when I graduated from Temple, I went to teach in predominantly white institutions. And teaching African American students in predominantly white institutions is a panel of itself. And so I had to backtrack and think about what is my goal, what is the cause, and for me as an educator, trying to affect people's consciousness. And I feel like if I had come at those students with the same energy I did at Temple and say, no, you're not black, you're African, they would have been like, yeah, you're crazy, right, and back up. And so even in having conversations with them now, when, you know, we talk about, well, why don't you identify as African? Well, I don't know exactly where in Africa I'm from. And, you know, that's important to know. And if I can't know that, then I can't rep an African identity. I mean, it's the same thing for them as, you know, if Rogelio was to say, I'm from New Orleans. And I'm like, where'd you go to high school? It's like, well, I've never been there, but I'm from New Orleans. Like, that's how their minds think. And so they don't feel like they can even claim the identity. And so for me, I feel like baby steps are important. And so, again, thinking as a Pan-African nationalist, I think black is one of those words that tends to be unifying for students to start thinking about themselves as part of a global community. And then once they can get that and maybe get off the African American, we can try to push some African in there too. But what's interesting, and I always tell them, I know more people from the Caribbean and Latin America who would claim African as an identity than I do African Americans who would do the same. And so there's something about this particular social context that makes an African identity even more tenuous. That people are like, no, don't call me that. Like, yeah, you have to call me African American, but don't call me African. I'm not an African bush boogie. I don't know anything about that. That's not mine. I'm American. And so really it still centralizes the American part of the identity. So baby steps, and I think black is almost like a good segue to get into this notion about Africanity even.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with so much, because I myself, going to school in upstate New York in the early 90s, you know, I came at a time period where literally, you know, Afrocentricity and centering Africa in not only academia but in our lives was so crucial. You know, so it's like we all have these personal journeys, but they are sometimes similar when you go to a predominantly white institution. I mean, for me, going, you know, I didn't know I was black until I literally in 1991 or 92, I was, you know, at an event and it was a Fuerza Latina organization, and, you know, my Spanish wasn't up to par, and there was this weird kind of tension with us non-perfect Spanish-speaking people being in a Latino group. And the following week, an organization would bring up Maita Morena Vega, and she's there and saying this speech, and like people's jaws are literally dropping because she's talking about being African, black, what it means to center yourself and all of that. And I remember by the end I was crying, not hysterically and crazy. I don't know how she felt when I went up to her, and I was like, oh my God, thank you. Because I was literally in this moment of understanding that I was not just a Puerto Rican person, and I was having a really deep identity crisis. And I had just joined the Black Student Union and have felt so at home. So after hearing her speak, and then going to another mentor on the campus who said, for the rest of your life, you're going to have to navigate this. You have to empower yourself, you know. And from that moment on, I began to also be okay with calling myself African. But at that political moment on college campuses, the All-African People's Revolutionary Party was very predominant, Minister Louis Farrakhan and Stokely Carmichael. So this notion of calling yourself African was it. That's what you did. You were happy. Hip hop was repping that, Public Enemy. You know, like it was that amazing time period. But now when I look at black and where younger people are and where other segments of the population, I think to call yourself black in America is still very powerful, because whiteness was created in America, right? Because for a long time, Irish people were not white enough, you know, but to always give reference to what the Black Panthers did, the Black Liberation Army, what that politically means for these young people of African descent to go out, say, I'm black and I'm proud and I'm beautiful, what that meant for not only people in the United States, but throughout the world, this kind of raising of the black consciousness. So, you know, that's where I stand. But with young people, there's such an anti-black sentiment in the world that it's almost like, if you could call yourself anything but black, why would you call yourself black, especially in the United States of America, in my particular experience. You know, and lastly, in thinking about how all these categories come about, I was showing my students last week, and they're going to finish watching it, the Rosie Perez documentary, Yo Soy Boricua para que tú lo sepas. And in it, this insistent that this 1/3 Taino, 1/3 European, and 1/3 African. And particularly within young Puerto Ricans, I hear that a lot. You know, this reverence towards, you know, this 1/3 kind of race theory, which I find problematic, not because I don't understand where my people come from, who the indigenous people were. But when you begin to say that, the African always becomes the less known. The African is the less talked about, you know, and it's important that we don't get into that 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Who then is 1/3 anything? Right. You know, who then is 1/4 European? Then if a Latino is all these 1/3, then folks in New Orleans are 1/3 too.
Right, right.
You know, so I think just again in the context of the world, that black is very important. And within hip hop, it is critical. You know, it is through Big Pun that we get this love of this Boricua Morena, what that meant for young women coming up at that time that are in your video. Yes. You know, that are me, that are, you know, so many of us sisters that struggle with that. So, you know, black to me is always, yeah, that's the place to begin. It's a powerful place.
To add on, I think it's generational. Like they said, the students that they've taught and things like that, and that's where I feel I come into play, my company comes into play, where we start to say, take the power or the negative connotation out of the word and say, the Black Latina movement, this is what we're doing, this is what, you know, what we're pushing, and we're pushing this, and it's very aggressive. Some of the things that I say, some of the things that we have in our other projects is very aggressive. But it's almost to the point that, you know, we have educated ourselves. We know the difference, and now we're saying this is a beautiful thing. Black is beautiful, black power, and, you know, giving that strength. It's sort of like in the hip hop community when they say, you know, whether you agree with it or not, when they say nigger and they say we're taking the power out of the word and we're not using it in the term that it was originally used for. Not to that extreme, but that's what we're doing. That's what I'm doing now with the term black. I do call myself a black woman. I will say an African American as well, but I will say black, and I use it. You know, we've done tons of different types of research and look at the color black and where, you know, what it means. And like you said, you know, Masons wore black and Jews wear black. Black is a very powerful color. You know, you go to a black tie affair, you have a black dress. It's elegant. It gives power. And so I use it, and I feel that it's a very powerful word, like you said. And in our generation, you know, kids can now understand it, and they come to grips with it, and they relate to it more than African American.